They say some men are born with fire in their bones, but Nat Turner, he was born with thunder in his eyes. Southampton County, Virginia, 1810. A place where the wind itself felt chained. Fields stretched endlessly, but freedom did not. Cotton grew tall, but the people forced to pick it lived low. And in the middle of this crushing silence, a child was watching the sky like it was speaking to him. Nat. Small, quiet, but never ordinary. They said he remembered things before he was old enough to understand them. Stories, faces, whispers. His mother swore he had the mark of a prophet. His grandmother said he was chosen. And the plantation owners? They called him strange, dangerous, too smart, too awake. Nat saw visions, not dreams, visions. He spoke of lights in the heavens, of men standing in shadows, of blood dripping from the moon. Other children were afraid of the dark, but Nat walked into it like he was born there. One evening, while other enslaved kids slept in cramped wooden cabins, Nat stared at a dying sunset. The sky turned red, too red. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. Later, he would say, "That was the first time God talked to me." Maybe it was madness, maybe it was destiny, but whatever it was, it would shape the deadliest rebellion America had ever seen. Before Nat was a leader, he was a listener, a watcher, a believer. As he grew, the visions grew with him. He saw fields burning in his sleep. He saw chains breaking like brittle twigs. He saw men rising from the dust with eyes full of fire. And every morning he woke with the same feeling. Something was coming. Something heavy. Something holy. The enslavers noticed his intelligence early. They let him learn letters, let him read scripture. They thought religion would tame him. They were wrong. Each verse he read lit a fuse. Each sermon he heard sharpened a blade deep inside him. Nat wasn't learning obedience. He was learning purpose. Around him, the world grew crueler. Whips cracked. Families were torn apart. Bodies dropped in fields like broken tools. Nat watched, listened, stored every scream deep inside, until the voices in his head became louder than the voices around him. He was no longer just Nat. He was the prophet, the chosen, the man who believed God himself had given him a mission. But destiny has two faces, one holy, one bloody. And Nat Turner was about to step onto a road where both waited for him. A road that would leave the nation shaking. A road that would drown Virginia in fear. A road that would start soon. Very soon. Before a rebellion is born, a warning always comes first. Nat Turner was no longer a boy, but the world still treated him like property. Days blurred into each other. Sunrise meant labor. Noon meant sweat. Night meant pain. Yet even in the worst moments, Nat felt watched, protected, pushed. He believed angels followed him. Others believed madness followed him. Either way, something walked behind Nat Turner that no one else could see. His visions sharpened. They weren't flashes anymore. They were messages, commands, demands. One night, Nat woke up gasping. He said he saw a serpent made of fire sliding across the sky. He saw the stars fall like stones. He saw men with no faces standing around him. He whispered, "They're telling me to rise." The others in the cabin stared at him like he was cursed. But Nat wasn't afraid. He felt chosen. He felt ready. Still, he waited, because he believed rebellions weren't started by men. They were started by heaven. And heaven had not yet given the final sign. Then came the winter of 1825, a cold that bit through wood and skin, a season where the enslavers grew crueler, because cold makes hard men even harder. Nat worked sunrise to sunset, his hands raw, bleeding, but his mind wasn't in the fields, it was in the sky, always in the sky. One morning, while working in the fields, Nat looked up and froze. The sun had changed, a pale circle, a trembling halo, a ring of light like an eye watching the earth. An eclipse, silent, unreal, a perfect wound in the heavens. Everyone around him gasped, prayed, panicked. Nat didn't panic. He smiled. He murmured, "This is it. This is the sign." To Nat Turner, that ring of light wasn't an eclipse. It was a crown, a signal, a command, a call to action. That night, Nat gathered a handful of trusted men in the shadows behind the slave cabins. No torches, no moon, just whispers, just fear, just faith. Nat spoke quietly, but his voice shook the darkness. The Lord has shown his will. There will be justice. There will be deliverance. There will be blood. Some trembled. Some backed away. Some wanted to run. But a few stayed. A few believed. A few felt the same fire Nat carried in his chest. They didn't know the plan yet. They didn't know the day. They didn't know the cost. But they knew this. Nat Turner was no ordinary man. And whatever he was about to unleash, it would change everything. The fields of Virginia were quiet. Too quiet. Because the storm was gathering. A storm with a name. A storm called Nat Turner. A rebellion doesn't explode in one moment. It grows quietly, like a spark hiding inside dry wood. After the eclipse, Nat Turner changed. He walked differently, spoke differently, looked at the world like he finally saw the map of his destiny. The enslavers felt the shift before they understood it. They sensed something dangerous in the air, the way animals sense a storm before it hits. Nat didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't boast. He simply watched, listened, waited. And he gathered men the way a river gathers rain, little by little, quietly, patiently. He approached them alone, in the fields, behind barns, inside moonless nights. His voice never rose above a whisper, but his words felt like thunder. Do you want to die a slave, or live a free man? Some shook their heads and walked away. Fear was stronger than hope. Fear was a prison with no locks. But others leaned in. Others nodded. Others felt something rise inside them that had been dead for years. A memory, a hunger, a flame. These men did not join Nat Turner because they believed they would win. They joined because they believed dying on their feet was better than living forever on their knees. Weeks passed. Nat worked like everyone else during the day, but at night he trained. Not with weapons, with faith, with scripture, with the belief that God himself had chosen him to bring judgment. He studied the moon, the tides, the habits of the slave patrols, the routines of every overseer, the pattern of every lock. every door. He memorized the weaknesses of the plantation like a surgeon studying a body. And soon he had a plan. A simple one. A deadly one. They would strike at night. Strike silently. Strike fast. Strike house after house before anyone understood what was happening. But Nat kept one thing to himself. The rebellion wouldn't be a message. It would be a cleansing, a judgment, a purge. One humid night in early 1831, Nat met with his closest men again. No lanterns, no moon, only darkness thick enough to drink. The men sat in a tight circle, their faces half lit by starlight. They were tired, scared, but ready. Nat looked at each one slowly, as if memorizing them, as if blessing them. Then he spoke. The time is near. The Lord has shown me another sign. This harvest season, the fields will drink more than water. No one moved. No one breathed. They understood. The rebellion wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a plan. It was coming. And once it began, there would be no turning back. The men rose quietly, hands trembling, hearts pounding, fates sealed. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and silent, like a grave, waiting to be filled. Want next? Make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Rebellions don't begin with noise. They begin with a heartbeat and a blade sharpened in silence. By August 1831, the air in Southampton County felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Nat Turner felt it everywhere, in the soil, in the wind, in the thumping of his own pulse. The signs had aligned, the visions had sharpened, the men were ready. All that remained was the night. The plan was simple. They would begin at the Travis plantation, the place where Nat lived, the place he knew like the inside of his own skin. But simple did not mean easy. A single mistake meant death. A single sound meant hanging. And still, Nat felt calm, almost peaceful. He believed he wasn't walking toward violence. He was walking toward prophecy. On the evening of August 21st, clouds rolled across the moon like black curtains. The world dimmed, the fields grayed, and the shadows grew long and hungry. Nat met the men in the woods behind the cabins, 17 of them, faces carved with fear, hands shaking, eyes blazing. No guns, too loud, just axes, clubs, knives. Tools meant for fields, now meant for freedom. Nat raised his hand, no speech, no sermon, just one whisper. It begins. The men nodded. Some prayed, some cried. Some clenched their teeth until they tasted blood. Then they moved, slowly, quietly, like ghosts returning to settle old debts. The Travis house loomed ahead, silent, asleep, unaware. The men surrounded it, every breath frozen. Nat entered first, bare feet, steady steps, a calmness that felt unnatural. Inside, the house was black and still. The only sound was Nat's heartbeat, thick, heavy, unflinching. His men followed, shadows slipping across wood floors. They found Joseph Travis in his bed, sleeping, soft, peaceful. Nat gave the signal, a single nod. The first blow felt like the sky cracking, then another, until the silence was broken, and the rebellion was born. The men moved through the house room by room, swift, silent, merciless. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't rage, it was war, and war has no gentle hand. By dawn, the Travis plantation was ash and echoes. Nat Turner and his rebels stepped back into the open fields, breathing hard, eyes wild, souls burning. The sun began to rise, but it didn't bring peace. It brought a warning. There was no turning back now. Blood had been spilled. The dead had been woken, and the rebellion had officially begun. The next plantation waited, and the next after that, and Nat Turner was ready to march toward all of them, with fire, with fury, with the weight of prophecy on his shoulders. Once the first door falls, the rest of the world starts shaking. Dawn had barely cut through the August haze when Nat Turner and his rebels stepped away from the Travis plantation. Their clothes were smeared, their blades were heavy. Their silence felt sharp enough to bleed. They were no longer field hands, no longer shadows in someone else's land. They were soldiers now, and the road ahead would demand everything they had. The next target was close, the Barrow plantation, a place known for cruelty, a place where screams were normal as sunrise. Nat led the men through the woods, their feet brushing against dew-soaked earth. Birds chirped overhead, oblivious to the war unfolding below. One man whispered, "Do you think they'll resist?" Nat didn't look back. He simply said, "Everyone resists when judgment comes." The men swallowed hard. They kept walking, kept breathing, kept believing. As they approached the Barrow property, the house stood quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hides fear behind walls. The rebels surrounded the home like a tightening noose. Nat raised his hand again. The signal. They burst in, fast, hard, relentless. Shouts erupted, furniture crashed, doors splintered. Some enslavers begged, some ran, some fought back with shaking hands. But Nat didn't hesitate. He believed he was carrying out divine orders, and divine orders allow no mercy. Within minutes, the house fell. Another strike, another wound in the system that chained them. The men stood panting in the ruins, sweat dripping, hearts pounding, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the realization of what they had done, and what they still had left to do. Word was spreading. Whispers raced across fields faster than horses. Some enslaved people prayed for Nat. Others hid. Some wanted to join but didn't know where he was. And every time Nat looked at the sky, he felt the same thing. This wasn't rebellion. This was prophecy unraveling. The rebels then advanced toward the Richardson plantation. By now they were nearly 30 strong. Armed with axes, clubs, knives, and a fury sharpened by generations. They attacked like a storm breaking loose from the earth. A sudden roar, a flash of violence, a moment where history changed direction. Inside the Richardson home, chaos erupted. Nat moved through the shadows like a man possessed, focused, silent, inevitable. His men followed him with the desperation of people who had already accepted death, but hungered for freedom more than fear. When the dust settled, the house was silent again. But it wasn't victory Nat felt, not triumph, just the cold weight of the road ahead. A road that demanded more blood, more fire, more courage than any of them had ever imagined. By afternoon, the rebels had grown to more than 40 men. Black men, enslaved men, free men, men who had nothing left to lose except their chains. The rebellion was no longer a spark. It was a wildfire. And Nat Turner, with his visions, his fury, his unshaken belief, was marching straight toward the heart of Virginia, ready to tear open history itself. For next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. By the second day, the rebellion was no longer a secret. It was a storm with a heartbeat. August 22, 1831. A Monday, but not an ordinary one. The sun rose slow and red, as if it already knew what the day would bring. Nat Turner stood at the edge of a dirt road, staring at that burning sunrise. His men gathered behind him, silent and sweating in the humid Virginia heat. Some clutched axes, some held knives, some carried farming tools sharpened into weapons overnight. Every man looked tired, but every man looked ready. Nat finally spoke. "This is the day the earth remembers our names." They believed him, even if they feared him, even if they feared what they had become. Their next march led them toward the Peter Edwards plantation, a big property, a wealthy one, a place where cruelty was polished and hidden behind white fences and perfect fields. Nat walked at the front. No hesitation, no trembling. He felt the visions pushing him forward, visions of fallen stars, of angels with swords, of judgment pouring like rain. When they reached the Edwards house, the rebels moved with precision, not chaos, not frenzy, discipline. They surrounded the house like a dark tide. 4 men blocked the exits. 2 slipped through the back door. Nat and the rest went straight through the front. Inside, screams echoed. Furniture toppled, glass shattered. The fight was quick, brutal. A reminder that freedom, once chased, demands a price that cannot be refunded. When it was done, the house fell silent except for the rebels' heavy breathing. Some men cried, some prayed, some stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Nat didn't judge them. He simply said, "We move forward." Because stopping meant death, and hesitation meant the rebellion would crumble. By midday, Nat's army grew to nearly 70 men. Some joined willingly. Some joined because Nat's visions made sense. Some joined because the fear of dying as a slave was greater than the fear of dying in battle. Along the road, enslaved families whispered as Nat passed. Some begged him to succeed. Some begged him to turn back. Some held children to their chests, praying this war would give them a world they had never known. The county was trembling now. White families fled. Militias began forming. Riders galloped through dusty roads, shouting warnings. But Nat didn't turn around. He didn't slow down. He believed the Lord was leading him straight through the heart of violence, toward a future only he could see. By late afternoon, the rebels marched toward their next target, Jerusalem, the county seat. It was more than a town. It was the symbol of authority, power, control. And Nat Turner was ready to challenge all of it. The men tightened their grips on their weapons. The wind grew colder. The path narrowed. Ahead lay the greatest test of the rebellion. Behind them lay everything they could never return to. And the day wasn't over yet. For next, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Every rebellion reaches a moment where fate tightens its grip. For Nat Turner, that moment was the road to Jerusalem. The sun was dropping when Nat Turner and his rebels stepped back onto the dirt road. The heat clung to their skin. The smell of sweat, smoke, and gunpowder followed them like a shadow. They were nearly 70 strong now, men who had left their lives behind, men who had nothing but conviction, men who followed Nat because he walked like someone guided by something they couldn't see. Jerusalem, the county seat, the place where the laws were written and where Nat's people were punished for breaking them. Marching toward it felt like marching into the lion's mouth. But Nat didn't slow, didn't blink, didn't doubt. He whispered, "We are not walking to our deaths. We are walking to our deliverance." The men followed, because faith, real faith, can be more powerful than fear. As they moved along the narrow road, the world around them began to change. Smoke rose in the distance from burning fields. Dogs barked. Church bells rang out of rhythm. This was no longer rebellion. This was panic. This was a county collapsing under a storm it never saw coming. Riders galloped ahead of them, warning farms. Nat Turner is coming. Arm yourselves. Hide your families. The rebels could hear gunshots echoing far off, not at them, but because everyone in Southampton County was shooting at shadows, terrified of what Nat represented. Nat didn't react. He kept his eyes forward, as if the road itself was speaking to him. By late afternoon, they reached the Parker farm, a fortified property, with armed men and families hiding behind locked doors. This would be their hardest fight yet. Nat gathered his men behind a split-rail fence. Some panted, some trembled, some whispered prayers into their hands. Nat lifted his face toward the sky. A dark cloud drifted slowly overhead. He saw it as a sign. He said, "It's time." The rebels surged forward. The Parker men fired first. Loud, violent cracks that split the air. 2 rebels fell instantly. The rest roared and charged. Axes collided with rifles. Knives clashed with bayonets. Bodies slammed into each other with the desperation of men who knew this moment might decide everything. Nat moved through the chaos like a man possessed, ducking blows, swinging with precision, driven by something deeper than rage. The fight was brutal, messy. Screams mixed with smoke, blood mixed with the dirt. But inch by inch, the rebels overpowered the defenders. When the battle ended, the ground around the Parker home was red. The rebels had won, but at a terrible cost. 8 of Nat's men lay still, their eyes open to a sky that would never see them free. The survivors stood silent, gasping, shaking, bleeding, not triumphant, just alive. Nat looked at his dwindling army, now barely 50 strong. He didn't speak of fear. He didn't speak of loss. He simply said, "We keep moving." Because if they turned back now, their blood would mean nothing. And if they reached Jerusalem, it could mean everything. Every uprising has a heartbeat. But every heartbeat has a final echo. Nat Turner and his men pushed forward after the Parker battle, bleeding, limping, but refusing to stop. 50 rebels. 50 men who had walked out of the shadows and into a war they knew might swallow them whole. But fate was shifting. The wind carried warnings. Gunfire echoed from miles away, and the ground felt like it vibrated beneath their feet. Not from God, not from visions, from something far more dangerous. Militias. Hundreds of armed white men, closing in, hunting, tracking. Nat Turner's rebellion was no longer the hunter, it was becoming the hunted. The rebels reached a crossroads where the dirt road split in 2. Left leading deeper into the county, right leading toward Jerusalem. Nat stopped, stared both ways. The air felt strange, heavy, wrong. He could feel eyes watching them from tree lines, could sense danger gathering like thunder. One of the younger rebels whispered, "Maybe we go around, take the woods, avoid the patrols." Nat shook his head, softly, but firmly. "No. The Lord did not show me a path through the trees. He showed me a path through the fire." The men swallowed their fear, because even when Nat seemed uncertain to himself, he never looked uncertain to them. They turned toward Jerusalem. And that was the moment the trap began to close. As they moved forward, the sound of hooves thundered behind them. Dozens, then more. Nat's heart pounded. The men spun around, and dust clouds rose from the road. A militia, large, organized, armed with rifles and horses. They were coming fast, too fast. Nat shouted, "Off the road! Into the swamp!" The rebels scattered into the thick marshland on either side of the road, mud swallowing their shoes, branches tearing their arms, the smell of stagnant water clinging to them. Gunshots erupted behind them, cracking through the trees. Bullets ripped leaves from branches. One man fell, another screamed. Two more disappeared beneath the mud after tripping in shallow water. Chaos, pure chaos. Nat kept shouting, "This way! Stay together!" But staying together felt impossible when death was raining from behind them. They reached a clearing, a small island of firm ground inside the swamp. For a moment, everything went quiet. The men gasped for air. Some curled over, dizzy. Some trembled so hard they could barely hold their weapons. They were broken, hunted, exhausted. But Nat Turner looked at them, his chest heaving, and said, "We are not done. Not while one of us still breathes." It was bravery. It was madness. It was both. The rebels regrouped, but their numbers were fewer now. Much fewer. 30 men, all that remained of 70. And the militias were still surging, still closing in, still tightening the noose. Nat stared into the trees. The wind felt colder. The branches seemed to whisper. He knew the rebellion was bending. He just didn't know if it was about to break. But one truth was clear. The next move could mean survival or the end. And Nat Turner had never been closer to the edge. For next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. The sun rose over Jerusalem like a blood-stained coin, and Nat Turner felt the world tightening around his throat. They marched toward the final stretch of the uprising, footsteps crunching on dust, breaths short, hearts heavier than their weapons. By now the rebellion had become a ghost of its original ambition, still burning, still dangerous, but fading under the weight of the armies closing in. Nat led the last handful of rebels through the woods, the same woods where he once prayed for signs. Now he prayed only for time. Time to think. Time to breathe. Time to understand why God's path always demanded sacrifice. The men were exhausted. Their clothes were torn, soaked in sweat, covered in mud and gunpowder. Their eyes, once burning with purpose, now flickered like dying lamps. But no one spoke of surrender. No one dared. They reached the edge of a clearing. Nat raised his hand. Silence fell instantly, because even in defeat, he was still their preacher. He scanned the fields below, patrols everywhere, dozens of armed white militias, horses tied to trees, muskets glinting, drums thumping, voices barking orders. The manhunt had turned into a military operation, and Nat Turner was the prize. The others looked to him, waiting for a plan that could save them, but Nat knew the truth. There were no clear paths left, only shadows, and the narrow chance of living long enough to strike again. He knelt, pressed his hand to the soil, closed his eyes. "God," he whispered, "show me what still must be done." A wind stirred, leaves trembled, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, Nat saw flashes of chains snapping, fields burning, children rising stronger than their fathers. A nation trembling. A future cracking open. He opened his eyes. He said, "We split." The men hesitated. "If we stay together, we die together. If we scatter, some of us may live to continue the fight." No one liked the order, but every man understood it. Nat gave each of them a final look. Long, heavy, filled with a sadness too deep for words. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, laborers, fathers, sons. Men who dared to challenge a system built to crush them. One by one, they clasped his hand, murmured their goodbyes, and slipped into the trees like shadows dissolving into dawn. And suddenly Nat Turner stood alone. For the first time since the rebellion began, the weight of loneliness hit him like a strike to the chest. But beneath it, something else sparked. Resolve. He wrapped his worn jacket tighter around himself, took his last remaining blade, and melted into the forest. Not to flee, but to wait, to watch, to decide when to move next. Because Nat Turner believed, down to his bones, that a man chosen by God does not fall easily, and that revolutions don't end. They echo. Some men vanish into history. Others burn through it, leaving scars that never fade. Nat Turner ran through the forest alone. The cries of his captured comrades still rang in his ears. The ground was soaked with rain and blood, sweat and mud mixing into a bitter taste. Every branch scratched his face. Every root threatened to trip him. Every shadow could hide death. He wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of failure. Because failure would mean more chains for the enslaved, more silence for their voices, more oppression unchecked. He paused in a clearing, breath ragged, knees shaking, and looked back at the road they had carved through Southampton County. The rebellion had begun as a spark, and for 2 weeks it had burned like wildfire. 70 men had become 50. 50 became 30. Now, he was alone. And yet he felt the fire still inside him, the fire God had placed there, the fire that no militia, no rifle, no fear could extinguish. Militias scoured the county. Houses were burned. Families fled. Revenge was being served as fast and mercilessly as Nat's own strikes had been. But Nat Turner didn't run blindly. He hid in swamps. He moved at night. He trusted the signs God sent him. Every star, every shadow, every whisper of wind was a guide. He became a ghost, the hunted, the legend. And the story spread. Whispers of the preacher who led the bloodiest slave rebellion in U.S. history traveled faster than soldiers could ride. Fear gripped the hearts of enslavers. Hope sparked secretly in the hearts of the enslaved. Nat's name became a weapon, a warning, a symbol. Days later, betrayal came. A neighbor, tempted by bounty and promises of safety, revealed Nat's hiding place. He was captured, bound, brought before white authorities who wanted answers, but not justice. Nat Turner spoke with calm, with conviction. He didn't beg, he didn't plead. He proclaimed his mission as holy. And even as the noose tightened around his neck, even as the crowd watched, terrified and enraged, Nat's spirit did not break. Because he knew the rebellion had already escaped him. It lived in the whispers of the fields, in the secret prayers at night, in the stories the enslaved told their children, in the fire that burned silently, but endlessly in the hearts of the oppressed. Nat Turner was hanged on November 11, 1831. His body fell, but his story did not. History remembers the preacher who saw visions, who led men into impossible odds, who believed that God himself commanded justice. And while the rebellion ended in death, terror, and chaos, its echoes shaped generations. It reminded the world, chains can bind the body, but never the spirit. Nat Turner's legacy is fire, fire that refuses to die, fire that haunts history and refuses to be forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, comment, and subscribe to uncover more dark, true tales from history.